We're going to do a little bit of an experiment together. In a second, you're going to see this video, and the instructions are to watch how many times the basketball players in white pass the ball. So I ask you to remain quiet as you watch the video so you don't disturb anybody else's counting, and then I'll be back with you at the end.
The monkey business illusion. Count how many times the players wearing white pass the ball. The correct answer is 16 passes. Did you spot the gorilla? For people who haven't seen or heard about a video like this before, about half missed the gorilla.
Keep watching.
If you knew about the gorilla, you probably saw it. But did you notice the curtain changing color or the player on the black team leaving the game?
How many people noticed the curtain?
Let's rewind and watch it again.
Okay.
Here comes the gorilla, and there goes a player, and the curtain is changing from red to gold. When you're looking for a gorilla, you often miss other unexpected events. And that's the monkey business illusion. Learn more about this illusion and the original gorilla experiment at theinvisiblegorilla.com.
I'm going to invite you to stand as you are willing and able and join in. Oh, wait, we already did that. Never mind. Sit down. Apparently, I got confused too. So I was watching for the gorilla. I knew it was there. Yeah, the first time I called those videos back up, I still didn't see it. I was looking for them. So how many people saw the gorilla? Were you startled? I heard laughter. And how many, none of you saw the curtain change, and one person saw the other player leave, one or two people. So the first time Virginia showed me videos like this, I was shocked. I didn't see it. And yet, even knowing what's going on, it's possible to miss the changes. There are many videos like this illusion out there. And one of the first ones that I called up as I was doing research for this, I was looking for the gorilla, but trying to also count the passes and still missed it. In our lives, we think we couldn't possibly miss it when something so obvious, so basic changes. But we can easily get distracted by anxiety, by fear. We can get so distracted by what we expect to happen that we miss what is actually going on. I remember how startled I was the first time I saw one of my elementary school teachers at the farmer's market. It never occurred to me that she would do something like go to the farmer's market or eat or leave school. I wondered if my other teachers were out there doing things. Had I missed them? How often do we miss seeing something when it is in a form we don't expect? Last week, we talked about how in the Easter story, when Jesus showed up, his followers didn't recognize him. I think the writers of that story realized that human beings faced with the unexpected are at times literally unable to see it. It's easier to travel the path that we expect to find before us. So much so that we can fail to see the potential within the unexpected that we encounter along the way. And yet, here's an interesting twist to the Easter story. Some theologians suggest that perhaps it wasn't just that his followers weren't expecting to see Jesus. Perhaps Jesus actually looked different. Maybe he came back in a different body, or maybe the resurrection was more metaphorical, and the disciples encountered someone else who was living Jesus' teachings, and it was in that way his life continued. In one of the stories in the book of Luke, after the resurrection, Jesus walked and talked with his followers who didn't recognize him. They told him the story of Jesus' ministry and invited the stranger to eat with them. And when Jesus sat and broke the bread, it was in this that they recognized him. They knew him in the breaking of the bread. For those that aren't familiar with Christian stories, sharing bread was kind of Jesus' thing. There's a story about him taking 5 loaves of bread and feeding 5,000 people. There's a story about him calling himself the bread of life. And before his death, he shared a Last Supper with his followers, breaking the bread and giving it to them, telling them to eat in remembrance of him. Throughout the Christian scriptures, breaking bread is used as a metaphor for sharing what is life-giving. So it isn't that surprising that Luke tells us that the disciples recognized Jesus in their midst when the stranger sat down and broke bread. A friend once told me a story about her time volunteering as a clinic escort. She had been escorting patients and their companions past anti-abortion protesters into the clinic all morning. It's exhausting work being with people as you support them, walking past those who are yelling, trying to block access, holding up signs, and waving pamphlets filled with misinformation, taking pictures, and more. And it's easy to get lost in the anger and the frustration. The short walk from the parking lot to the clinic door became an exhausting trek. So when it was time for a break, my friend got a few of those little Debbie snack cakes from the vending machines. You've seen them. And together, the group sat down, and one of the volunteers began to break the cakes apart, passing pieces around to the others. In that moment of pausing to share in the most basic human act of nourishment, my friend tells me she recognized the sacred. She realized there was a connection between this moment outside the clinic and all the moments she had spent in church sharing communion. She felt the presence of the holy, and it looked different. It wasn't a church building, it wasn't with church people, it didn't involve the same words or music, there were no little cups of juice. But she recognized the sacred in the breaking of the bread, in the sharing of that which is life-giving. Even when everything is chaos, and it feels like nothing is the way we are used to it being, there are moments when we see through all that change. There are moments when we see the stable core of an experience, a person, a community. Writer Octavia Butler once said, "All that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change." Everything changes. Every community changes. But the sacred can still be recognizable. Tree of Life has changed many times, in many ways, over the 168 years of our existence. We started as 2 separate congregations. The first, known as the Universalist Congregation in Woodstock, was organized in 1855, 6 years before the Civil War. Organized by Rev Daniel and Mary Livermore, the Universalists believed in the salvation of all people, no matter who they were. The Livermores were abolitionists in a time of profound social change in the United States. During their time in the Chicago area, Mary, unhappy with the traditional role of minister's wife, formed the home for aged women and the hospital for women and children. Once the Civil War started, she helped run the Chicago branch of the Sanitary Commission. which took care of injured soldiers. After the war, Mary became deeply involved in the suffrage movement, advocating for the rights of women to have a say in the direction of this country and in their own lives. This is a part of our origin story. Tree of Life was born as a congregation celebrating access to freedom for all, involvement in society, social action, speaking out, and caring for people in our community and our society. Throughout our area, this congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread, the sharing of that which is life-giving. After the Civil War, another congregation, the First Congregational Church of Woodstock, was formed by returning soldiers who were, among other things, unhappy with the town's Presbyterians who allowed drinking. Some things have changed around here. When the Universalist congregation in Woodstock was forced to close its doors in the 1930s, many of its remaining members joined First Congregational Church. And First Congregational formed an official affiliation with the Universalist Church of America, giving us a connection to two different denominations, both progressive traditions seeking social change. And it was a big change. Joining two congregations to do ministry together always is. Things were different, but still, this congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. And in the 1950s, the joint congregation had incredible energy, and music was led by our 21-year music director, Grant Nolan. Under Grant's leadership, our choir thrived and gained a positive reputation in our community. Music is still an incredibly valuable part of how we offer life to one another. This is the first time we changed our name when the church voted to rename itself the Congregational Universalist Church of Woodstock. Even with a new identity, our congregation's involvement in care for our neighbors continued as the women of the church led the formation of a local chapter of the American Red Cross, and then the Ladies Auxiliary to Memorial Hospital. Still active in social justice and the civil rights movement, the church sent their minister at the time, Rev Jenn Gracen, to Selma, Alabama in 1965 to march with Dr. King and other protesters, including many Unitarian Universalists. Their name had changed, their minister had changed, their social justice actions had changed. Many things were different. Still, this congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. In the mid-1970s, Reverend Barbara Merritt was ordained. Reverend Barbara, who wrote the reading that Judy shared today, was one of very few female ministers of the time. Reverend Barbara and our congregation continued the practice of social involvement, of caring for our neighbors and one another by working for improved health services and advocating for the elderly. In the 1980s, the congregation's members organized an annual review called Paradise People. Paradise People, later called Dilly's Follies, how many have been involved in either? A few of you. Was a wildly popular musical celebration and fundraiser. Even as things continued to change for us and in our community, that thread of coming together in joy and reaching out to help our neighbors continued in our congregation. Still, this congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. In 1984, we voted to change our name again, this time from the Congregational Universalist Church to the Congregational Unitarian Church. This wasn't a theological statement so much as a recognition that the public better recognized the name Unitarian. But it was another name change, new signs, new stationery, I'm guessing a new recorded message for the answering machine, remember those? It was different. Still, this congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. Our church became involved in supporting folks experiencing homelessness. It started with the Public Action to Deliver Shelter, the PADS program. And when the program started, homeless folks were sleeping in church buildings. Patrick Murfin, who coordinates our current homeless ministry, Compassion for Campers, tells the story of the congregation's engagement with the PADS program. The winter of 1985 was bitter, and when the congregation helped co-found the program to provide people with an alternative to the harsh, cold nights outdoors, the city objected, saying they would prosecute church leaders if they tried to house people without a hotel license. Reverend Stephen Dion spoke to the church board and with their agreement responded to the city that they would not only open the church building to house people, but they would also invite the media to be present. And that it might not look good if the city chose to arrest the ministers and the board of a church. The city backed off, and our congregation was one of several that housed homeless folks after that time. And the needs of our community have changed. The activities of the church have changed. The way we use our building has changed. It looked different, and yet still our congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. In 2000, we made the decision to end our formal ties with the Congregationalists and unite more closely with the Unitarian Universalist Association. During this time, Reverend Dan of blessed memory was serving this congregation. Reverend Dan was a force, supporting our continued presence in the community. His ministry was characterized by active social justice work and outreach in Woodstock, our home at the time. And in 2009, we voted to change our name again, reclaiming Universalist as a part of our identity. We became the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Woodstock. Another new minister, another new name. Still, this congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. In 2011, Don Mativier, now of blessed memory, purchased and offered this building in McHenry for us to use. The congregation voted to accept the gift, and we celebrated our first worship service here in 2012. Shortly after moving to McHenry, we called Reverend Sean Parker Dennison to serve our community in 2013. The end of Reverend Sean's ministry 4 years later was difficult for the congregation and Reverend Sean. Yet it was during Reverend Sean's ministry that we changed our name again to the Tree of Life Unitarian Universalist Congregation. Even as things changed, our congregation continued to care for one another, establishing chalice circles to support each other in our spiritual growth, as well as other programs that are still in effect today. We established the monthly Second Sunday collection, in fact, today, and we do know it's the third Sunday. You will hear from the program that we are supporting this month. It was also during Reverend Sean's time with us that we spearheaded and coordinated a marriage equality campaign and formed Compassion for Campers when the PADS program shut down. A new building, a new address, another new name, and new programs. New community needs and new ways of serving our community. We didn't look the same or even sound the same, but still, our congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. During our time without a minister, members and friends stepped forward to ensure our congregation and its vital programs continued. When COVID-19 hit, members and friends of our congregation supported one another, organizing a call to everyone, shifting services, committee meetings, religious education, and so many other activities online. One of the things Tree of Life did for a time that caught my eye during my own search was the nightly story time that was offered during the early part of the pandemic. New ways of ministering, new ways of gathering. new needs within and outside of our church. It was very different. But still, our congregation was recognized in the breaking of the bread. Over the last 3 years, we have created and are now implementing a mission statement to guide us forward. We've transitioned to hybrid services, reopening our building to our own programs and to others. Some of our members have stepped back, and we've seen a surge of new members bringing energy and enthusiasm to our beloved community. And those threads that have been there since the beginning, they remain. We continue to be involved in the community, supporting Compassion for Campers, running a successful Faithify campaign, supporting New You the Vote, encouraging people to have a voice in the wider community by attending council meetings and even running for office. We continue to support one another in weekly gatherings for worship and frequent gatherings for book group, breakfast together, circle social hours, chalice circles, and other fellowship times. Our congregation can be recognized in the breaking of the bread. We've changed and changed again, and it can feel a bit chaotic. May we remember we need not control chaos, only nudge it a bit. And we don't know what's coming. We know we are looking at a minister change, and we don't know what else is changing. We are partnering with Praise Circle. We don't know what the next 2 years will bring, but I am confident we will continue to be recognized in the breaking of the bread. My beloved spiritual companions, while the only lasting truth is change, we find those strong threads run all the way through our congregation's story. Care for one another, action to create a more just society, and love of joy, and of course, music. These are the ways we share that which is life-giving. These are the ways we break bread. These are how we know each other and how we will be known. May it always be so. Blessed be. Amen.